Hi students, this is Professor Aher and welcome to Principles of Marketing, Marketing 3336. This is Chapter 6 from Principles of Marketing, Kotler and Armstrong, 18th edition. The topic today will be business markets and business buyer behavior. In addition to this, we will have a guest speaker at the end that it's important that you pay attention to because he'll be discussing some of those key principles from both Chapters 5 and 6. And we look forward to talking to him as well. So let's get started with Chapter 6. Chapter 6 really covers the topic of what we call business-to-business marketing. So this is one business selling to another business as opposed to selling to an end consumer. So one of the good examples of business-to-business marketing that is utilized and leveraged as a tool all the time is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great source of names for professionals and professionals across industry, and oftentimes salespeople and business professionals, that is business development managers, use LinkedIn as a source of finding inroads into corporations to be able to sell from one company to another. So I'll provide you an example of this. Let's say that we are a supplier for auto manufacturers and we supply tires. So let's say we work for the company Goodyear, and I'm a key account sales representative from Goodyear. So I go out and I sell to important customers, and I'm trying to be able to sell more effectively to Mercedes-Benz. And so what I might want to do is try to look in LinkedIn and my LinkedIn contacts to see who I have who works at Mercedes-Benz that is an important buying functions at Mercedes-Benz. And then use an in-mail function at LinkedIn to be able to contact them or even market to people in the business-to-business area there by providing information and details about our tire offerings and what kind of discounts and things that we might have in that marketplace. This is just an example of how one of those tools, LinkedIn, is used as a digital mechanism to connect organizations to other organizations. We're going to be talking more detailed about this concept of business-to-business marketing today because I know many of you are probably very familiar with business-to-consumer marketing, but less familiar with business-to-business marketing. Let's start off by defining a couple of key terms that work in this chapter. The first is business buyer behavior. This refers to the buying behavior of organizations that buy goods and services for use in the production of other products and services that are sold, rented, supplied to others. So business buyer behavior is how a business behaves when making purchases or buying from other companies. So as in the example I provided to you, there's where Mercedes-Benz is looking to source tires as a source for their production of Mercedes-Benz. So they might look to Goodyear as a resource to provide those tires. And then the extent to which that buyer behaves a certain way is termed business buyer behavior. The next term that's important that we understand is what we call the business buying process. This is really the process by which buyers actually make their decisions. So the definition is business buying process is the process where business buyers determine which products and services are needed to purchase and then find, evaluate, and choose among the alternative brands. So really what this gets at is the process by which a business looks to another business to source them and how they go about making that decision. That's called business buying process. So these are two key terms that we'll be using moving forward when we talk about business-to-business selling as well as business-to-business marketing. So let's talk about a few key features that are specific to business markets that aren't necessarily the case in business-to-consumer markets or B2C markets. The first specific thing is that fewer but larger buyers. So it's often the case in business-to-business markets that when I'm selling, and I'm a company selling to my customers, and let's think about Goodyear selling their tires to another business. If we think about that business market versus the consumer market that Goodyear might sell to individuals, there's going to be a lot less companies that are looking to buy volumes of tires to be able to use in their production processes. So typically in business-to-business markets, when we're marketing our products, we have a much smaller and often defined set of customers that we're looking after. So instead of there being millions or hundreds of thousands of customers, oftentimes there can be anywhere from 1,000 customers down to even maybe 10 to 20 specific potential customers or buyers that are looking to be able to buy our products. Derived demand. Another thing is that the demand itself in these markets is often derived. What we mean by that is that the selling organization or the marketing organization has to generate demand for the products downstream. It's just not naturally developed. So to be able to sell more effectively, we have to actually derive or develop that demand. The next is the demand is inelastic, meaning that the demand is actually less stable and less affected by externalities in those markets. Then we talk about fluctuating demand. So demand cycles up and down in the cycle. In fact, oftentimes we think about fluctuating demand in business markets. There's a very classic study called the whiplash effect. So that's where we see cycles in demand coming up and down depending on times of production, times of manufacturing, times of customer demand that demand things up and down. So we think about derived demand. So demand is derived from downstream utilization. So for example, people buy cars. So so at that point, Mercedes-Benz needs more tires to produce more cars, and so they look upstream to a source to be able to supply those tires that they need. So the demand for those tires is derived from a downstream focus, which is the customer. Now, remember, inelastic demand. The demand is not fluctuate or it does not is not affected heavily by externalities, and fluctuating demand, it cycles up and down over time. So when we think about one of the things that's unique about business markets is that in business markets, we have what's called the buying unit. So instead of selling to a particular individual like we do in consumer markets, so we have a company selling to a particular person, or remember we talked about it could be a family or household. When we're selling to business units, we're selling to actually a complex buying center. So if we think about that situation where Goodyear is selling to Mercedes-Benz, they're not just selling to one person at Mercedes-Benz who makes all the decisions on what tires they use. They could be selling to a very complex decision center. So that could include people in manufacturing, people in finance, people in the purchasing department, all of those people that have an influence over the decision making that's made on where to source their tires that they utilize in their production process. So it takes a lot more effort, there's a lot more professionalism in the buying process, and it's harder to be able to make those sales in business markets, oftentimes far more complex than in consumer markets. And so oftentimes the decision-making process tends to be extremely complex as well. So there are different kinds of buying that happens, and we want to talk about 3 different styles of buying that happen in business markets. So that is, one organization is buying from another organization. Let's stick with our example of Mercedes-Benz is buying their tires, and let's say they're buying from Goodyear. The first thing that they could do is what's called a straight rebuy. So they bought a specific type of tire in the past, and they've specified those for their production of their certain kind of Mercedes-Benz, and they need the exact same kind of tire again. That would be what's called a straight rebuy. It's a buying situation where the buyer routinely reorders something without any modifications. You can imagine that's a very simple, the least complex type of business buying. So that's where we actually are buying identically the exact same specifications. We just replace that order. That's called the straight rebuy. The next situation, which tends to be a little more complicated, and oftentimes what we say is takes more time and more people are involved in the decision-making process, is what we call the modified rebuy. So instead of buying exactly the same tire, they want to change the specification of the tire that they're looking for. Let's just say that they want to make it wider, or they want a different tread on the tire, or they want a different composition of the materials used in the tire. Any of those kinds of things are what we call a modified rebuy. So instead of buying exactly the same thing, I'm somewhat modifying what I'm buying. And that modified rebuy can not only just be the actual product itself, but it can be some specifications as far as the terms of the buy, how fast we have to deliver those tires, where we source our rubber that we put in those tires, things like this. So a modified rebuy is a buying situation in which the buyer wants to modify the product specification, prices, terms, or suppliers. So they want to change things up a little bit. The new task buy situation is where the buyer buys a product or service for the very first time. So they've never sourced this product or service before, and they're looking to buy this product or service. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say Mercedes-Benz is now getting into the e-car market, so the electric car market. And they've actually never before purchased some of the parts that they need for electric vehicles. And as a result of that, they have to think about sourcing those and going to companies that produce, for example, batteries that can be used in the operation of these new Mercedes-Benz vehicles. So they have to look for the sources of those batteries, the supply, the service of those batteries. That's what we call a new task buy situation. So you can imagine the situation in new task where the buyer purchases a product or service for the very first time is going to be far more complex and probably involve a lot more people in that process of making the decision of what to source, what to pay, and how to utilize that product. So as we go from a straight rebuy to a modified rebuy to a new task, the complexity of the decision process enhances substantially when we go from the base level all the way to the most complex, which is the new task situation. Now, let's think about these decision makers. Remember, we talked about who are the decision makers in the buying process. Let me use another example and get away from the car example and use something else. Let's say that I'm a pharmaceutical sales representative and I'm representing a drug, and it's a new drug to treat, it's an antibiotic drug that we use to treat infections, particularly sinus infections and upper respiratory infections. And we found that it's a really effective drug, but it's better than many of the ones on the market, and it works against infections that are resistant to many of the bacterial strains that are out there now. So I want to send my sales reps in to meet with doctors, particularly doctors that treat these types of infections, ear, nose, and throat doctors, and I want to convince them to utilize my new drug. So when I send them in, they could be dealing with what we call the buying center. So let's think about the center of individuals at that doctor's office that help make the decisions of what drugs to use and not, or at a hospital that make those decisions. So we have the users. The users are ultimately the patients. The patients come in and they have to ultimately make the decision of what product that they want to use, or what, if they'll use the product the physician is prescribing. The doctor in some ways is also the user because they're using the drug, oftentimes administering it and having the person use it. Now, we have what we call the influencers. Think about everyone that's making a decision. Although the doctor makes the decision on what drug to use, they might get information from nurses, from other doctors that they talk to, from experts in the field. These are individuals that influence their decisions. The actual decider of what drug to use is the doctor. So the doctor decides what to administer to the patient. So they're the decider. So a person can be a user and a decider also. They can play multiple roles. And then we have the purchaser. The purchaser is who's paying for that product. Now, in the situation of a healthcare product in the United States, it could be your insurance plan decides whether they're going to pay for that product or not, or it could be the patient themselves or the purchasers. And then we have what we call the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is the individual that stands between you as a company and that end decider that decides on the utilization of that medication. So for example, if I'm a pharmaceutical rep and I come into a doctor's office and I want to meet a doctor to be able to talk about this new drug, and the receptionists and nurses won't let me have time to meet that doctor, they are what's known as a gatekeeper. They are keeping a gate that stands between myself and the individual that is ultimately making the decision. So in many other situations, like in industrial buying, and let's take that Mercedes-Benz example again, we have a variation of different situations. Let's say those tires that are going on a car again, and we're selling the Goodyear tires, and maybe Goodyear tires are used on the Mercedes-Benz. So we have the users, that's pretty obvious, the ones that are using the tires. We have the influencers. Those could be the engineering department influences the decision of what tires to use in the process. We have the deciders. That could be the technical people that make the technical specifications. It could be also be the purchasing department that makes the negotiation. We also have the purchasers, the ones who write the check. So that could be the department head, it could be the chief financial officer, it could be a chief administrator. And then we have the gatekeepers. Those are the ones that stand between us and those people that are the decision makers. So it could be secretaries, it could be administrators, anybody that blocks the influence that we have to that end user. So we realize that this is what we call the buying center. This is unique to business selling and marketing. So when we think about these roles that these individuals play, they play very important roles in making decisions in an organization. And that's why we say that business-to-business markets have complex buying center decision making. So it's not so simple as a consumer market. There's a lot of people involved, and there's a lot more complexity involved in that decision that's ultimately being made in a business market. So as we think about these different buying situations, I want you to think about the straight rebuy, the modified rebuy, and the new buy situation. How many people get involved in each of these situations if we think about it? So remember the straight rebuy. The straight rebuy is where you're buying exactly the same thing that you bought multiple times before or previously. So they're going in and they're selling and marketing exactly the same thing. So who does that get affected? So really maybe the only person being affected here is the buyer or the decider. But we don't really have to worry about influencers, users, gatekeepers, because you're just buying it all over again. Now the modified rebuy, remember, is where we change something up a little bit. So the decision center could get wider. In this situation, we may need to actually touch many of these individuals. But in the new buy situation where these people have never bought before, we're probably having to work with everybody in the buying center to be able to get a decision made. So now you can see why the buying decisions and the decision center work together to be able to help us decide how we influence a purchasing situation. So when we think about business buying in business markets, very much like we did the consumer markets, we think of the hierarchies of information that influence the ultimate buyer. Remember the consumer market, we went through this in some detail. This is very similar to the consumer market, and I want you to be familiar with this figure that's in your book and understand this concept a little bit. It really does mirror that situation quite a bit, but it's important that we get a clear understanding of this. So at the biggest end of things, ultimately, the environmental factors affect buyers. And that is things like how the economy is running, the technology that's in the markets, the competition, the culture. So remember, that's the really big end phenomena stuff that then drips down all the way and trickles down to ultimately affecting the buyer. Within that, we have organizational phenomena. Specific to any buying organization are strategies, the structure of that particular company, their systems and processes they use and procedures. So this is the organization specific. Remember, we talked about this the complexity of the buying center and stuff may vary across organizations. Then we have the interpersonal. This is, what are the interpersonal dealings that we have between the individuals in that buying center, and the way they make decisions, the dynamics of the way they work together that go. And then, of course, we have the individual things that get down to the age, job, motivation, all the individual preferences of the people that are entities within that large organization. They all come down to affect the buyer. Very similar to the situation we talked about last session, where we talked about consumer markets, but applying this in a business market framework, thinking of it as a much more complex phenomena at the organizational level. So that's the information for today on our business markets. Now let's go to our interview with Fidelity, talking about consumer markets and business markets with Justin Bremer. Hi students, this is Professor Ahern with your Marketing 3336 class, and we have the pleasure today of having a guest with us to talk about careers as well as opportunities in the marketing and sales function. You know, the last couple of classes we've been talking about business to customer, B2C selling and B2B selling. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today and learning a little bit more about particularly how Fidelity Investments, one of the largest investment organizations in the world, markets and sells to their customers. So to introduce today, we have Justin Bremer. Justin is the Vice President and Regional Planning Consultant at Fidelity Investments. He is located here in Houston, Texas. Another great thing about Justin, he's a graduate of University of Houston, and you know, he's done very well for himself coming up in the field of financial services. So welcome, Justin, to talking to us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Dr. Ahern.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Justin, so we have a class of over 1,000 students that you'll be talking to today. Many of which just have, you know, put yourself back in the time when you were maybe 20 or 21 years old, or even maybe a little older. You're thinking about your career stage of where you're going to go on stuff. And so the goal today is maybe just to get them to understand, you know, the financial services industry a little bit, and in particular, how you market in the financial services sector. So maybe what we could do is I could pass it over to you, and you could take a minute to introduce Fidelity. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself first, about how you got into Fidelity and financial services, and then maybe introduce Fidelity a little bit for us.
Perfect. Happy to. So a little bit about my background. So as Dr. Ahern mentioned, I'm a graduate of University of Houston and the sales program there at U of H. It was some of the best time of my life was being there on campus and involved with those programs. And I just celebrated 10 years with Fidelity Investments, as you mentioned, as a regional planning consultant. And my role here at Fidelity is to work with our advisors and help coach and develop them to deliver successful financial plans for our clients. And so it's keeping them up on top of what's going on in the market and really how we interact with our clients. At Fidelity, you know, we've been privately owned since our founding over 70 years ago, and our mission has never changed, and that's to meet with our clients and provide positive financial outcomes for everyone. And that's going to look different for each of us as our circumstances and you know, components of our life are different amongst one another. But our job is to be there and be a resource. And as you mentioned, we're one of the largest financial firms out there. We are the largest 401k provider in the United States. So as you all kind of leave marketing class and begin your careers, right, most of you will have the opportunity to invest in a 401k, begin saving for your retirement. And many of those relationships you'll find will be with Fidelity Investments. And you know, just a little bit about our business and our business model. You know, 1 in 4 Americans have a Fidelity account. They have a relationship with us either directly or through an employer. And so we pride ourselves on that, of being, you know, a relevant part of many Americans' households. And we've got currently 32 million individual investors that invest with us at Fidelity, that represent about $8.3 trillion in assets. And Of that 8.3, we are discretionarily managing 3.3 of that. So those clients have asked Fidelity to take an active role in the management of those investments on behalf of them. And so, again, very important to us and our stability and our ability to kind of be there and help our clients. And just to give you a little overview, as you mentioned, right, we're in marketing 3336, and we're kind of beginning our midway through our education, right? Just to give you an idea of some of the different areas that we step in and play a role in clients' life, you'll see here on the screen, right? Whether it's investments, retirement, family assistance, right? So things like education, right? 529 accounts, helping people with wills and trusts and estate planning. So really any avenue of their financial life that they need to plan for, we want to be there as a resource to help educate them and allow them to make the best financial decisions for themselves and their families.
That's great. Thanks, Justin. One of the things, if I could really quickly, let me pull something up here. But one of the things I was hoping to talk to you a little bit about was to talk a little bit about, one of the things this week we've been covering is business to business versus business to consumer markets. So do you guys both have people who market to the individual investor as well as companies or organizations that you want to help manage access to as well?
We do. We really play in both spaces as well as somewhere in between. And I'll give you a few examples. So I work in our investor centers, right? We have more than 190 investor centers across the country where our clients have direct relationships with us, where they say, you know what, I want a person that I can go talk to, that I can pick up the phone or email or be in communication with to answer my questions and help me plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of our straight to consumer space. We also, on the other end of the spectrum, Fidelity is one of the largest custodians out there. So if I'm placing financial transactions, right, it's a heavily regulated industry. They have to clear through a company is what it's referred to. And so Fidelity as a custodian provides services to individual advisors. So Dr. Ahern Financial Services, if you set up your own business, you would need a clearing firm to be able to transact through. And so we provide that in that capacity. And then really, when you think about corporate benefits, so the 401k retirement plan that I mentioned, or a health savings account that might be part of someone's benefit, or a stock program where they receive shares of stock as a bonus.
Yep.
Our customer is the organization, the business that has chosen to engage with Fidelity. But at the end of the day, they're providing value for their employees. And so we really have to deliver on both fronts in those relationships. We need to make sure that we are providing the highest level of service to the organization and making it easy for them to transact and stay on top of managing their own business. But at the end of the day, when their employees need help or assistance, we have to make sure that we're delivering a high level experience for them as well, and really keeping everyone in a good spot and happy.
So that's interesting. So both, because you guys manage investments, you go after the individual investor and manage those individuals, but you also go after financial advisors that are independent from Fidelity to give them access to some of your investments to work with their clients as well. And that would be more of the business market side of things.
Correct.
Maybe we could take a minute to talk a little bit about how do you guys go identify and attract and market to the individual investor? So maybe we could talk a little bit about what does Fidelity do to market and bring people in and get them to work with you all from an individual investor perspective?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, we believe that the differentiator in our business model is our people, right? And what I mean by that is having planners and financial consultants across the country and our investor centers to be able to be there and meet one-on-one, because there's a lot of things in the financial services world that are converting to a digital experience, and it's done a lot of great things for investors. It's caused a lot of price compression, and at the end of the day, it's saving individuals money. But there's still a great demand for that emotional, personal relationship to help make these decisions. Oftentimes, clients, when they're discussing their financial situation with you, they're talking to you about things that they really don't share with anyone else. Sometimes even their spouse. And so, it's a highly personal decisions and things that have to be made. And so, there's no replacing that individual relationship. So that's first and foremost. You'll see us in all of the traditional, marketing avenues as well. Fidelity is very cognizant of our brand, and maintaining brand integrity and always doing the right thing for our customers has allowed us to stay in that place of being a trusted name within the financial space. And that's very important to us, because having that large base of investors that have their 401ks with us, it's less about attracting new customers to Fidelity and more about how are we fostering and maintaining those relationships so that they become long-term clients of Fidelity.
Well, that's interesting. So we have two elements. We have the retention and we have the attraction element for the clients. So are your financial advisors simultaneously working on the retention growth side as well as the attraction side of things?
They are. So they maintain their books of clients, and it's as important to keep the relationships and clients that you have as it is to gain new ones in this space. And financial services will always be a competitive landscape, and people will always be out there attempting to take clients and take share of wallet of where individuals choose to invest. And so there can never be a blind eye turn to either component, really. They're both equal weighting of how am I getting out there in front of new potential prospects, as well as how am I fostering the relationships that I currently have.
So one of the things we've been talking a little bit about is segmentation and target marketing in the class. And maybe from an individual investor perspective, is there a way that Fidelity segments their market and then provides services across different segments?
There is, and there's probably multiple ways, truly, in that, one clear and obvious way is there's segmentation at asset levels, right? And based on the needs that the clients have at different levels, right? And really the focus is on eliminating friction for the end user, right? And we all know in a digital world of being able to pick up the phone and connect or schedule an appointment or ask a question, those things are important and they matter. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the appropriate level of service for the needs of the customers, right? So if I'm 26 years old, brand new, graduate out of the University of Houston and start my career, I'm going to have a pretty minimal amount of interaction that I need from Fidelity. Maybe help me set up my retirement account, maybe a 529 once I start having kids. But as I approach retirement and those years closer to retiring and begin needing to establish a plan for the future, I'm obviously going to have a lot more needs that come up and need to be communicated with much more frequently. And so at the end of the day, we do it all through the lens of the customer and what their needs are in their given time frame of life and their asset size, because as asset levels grow, the needs tend to become more complex from a planning standpoint. And so we want to make sure that not only are they in the right service model and for engagement and interaction, but they're also with the appropriate level of advisor to handle their needs that we're familiar with.
Do you have sort of a set asset tiering that you use in the organization to say, for example, 1 million plus assets, 5 million, 10 million, something like that the organization follows?
Yeah, it typically the ranges are kind of under a $250,000 mark is one. That 250 to a million space is another. 1 million to 10, and then a 10 plus is kind
Okay.
of a general guideline of the 4 basic segments that come into play on the most frequent.
And does it change the individuals that service those models depending on what asset group they're in?
It does. It changes the relationship and how frequently we engage with the clients and the individuals that they're working with are different amongst each tier as well.
Okay, that's very interesting. So yeah, that's a little bit about segmentation and stuff. That's super helpful. Um, and one other thing is maybe we could just spend a second talking about. We talked about the side of business markets and stuff like that as well. So you have a separate set of advisors that go out there to work in the business markets. Can you tell me a little bit about their job?
Yeah, and so really, we play the role of allowing the advisor's business to function smoothly and efficiently, and really they look at us as a resource as well. And what that looks like is helping them have the structures in place, the technology in place for them to be able to process the transactions for their clients. Their clients would receive a statement on Fidelity letterhead, showing that where the assets are custodied. And so really we're a resource for them, not only from a getting business done perspective, allowing them to process the transactions that they need to, but we also provide a great deal of resources of practice management, and help them think through how do they build their business, how do they grow their business, and engage. And so we're really kind of a business partner with those firms that we custody assets for.
That's great. And so one final thing as we close out is I'd really like you to tell the students a little bit about if they wanted to get into a career in financial services, what's the direction for them to go to be able to effectively get into that type of career?
Absolutely. So there's so many amazing programs that are out there today. I know at the University of Houston, there's a personal financial planning track that's available to the students in the business school that is an amazing opportunity to get in and see what the industry is like. At Fidelity, there's tons of ways that you can come into the organization. So I started in one of our investor centers here in Houston, and again, as I mentioned, about 10 years ago, working at the front is what's called a financial representative. And really, you're the face of Fidelity when clients come through the door, and helping them, understand what they're there to accomplish, what their needs are, and who's best there to assist them. Is it something I can help with? Do they need an advisor? How can we help them with their transactions that they need to take? But really, at the end of the day, we all will have financial decisions to make, right? One way or the other, no matter what path we take. And our role in financial planning is largely an emotional and therapy related job. I always like to say it has much less to do with the stock market and the inner workings of how the markets go, and much more connecting with people on a personal level, understanding the goals that they have for themselves and their family, and helping them accomplish that. So certainly, on fidelity.com, we've got a career section that gives you a great example of, for college graduates, what are the paths that are out there, whether it be in our investor center or one of our regional centers across the country. But if you're passionate about helping people solve problems, right? And for us, it just happens to be finance related and money related.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ways to do it.
That's cool. Well, Justin, I really thank you for your time today. And I know the students learned a lot from this. And it's also great to hear from somebody who was a student with us years ago, who's been so successful. Thanks. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.